12,000 species had gathered in the Great Hall, and not one of them took humanity seriously. David Webb sat in his assigned seat at the back of the chamber, in the section marked for emerging civilizations. The chair was too large for him, designed for beings twice his size. His feet dangled slightly off the floor. He did not complain. He had learned, in his 3 years as Earth's ambassador, that complaining only confirmed what the galaxy already believed about humans, that they were children. Loud, messy, emotional children who had stumbled into space by accident and would probably blow themselves up within a century. The Surani delegate rose to speak. Its body was made of living crystal, light bending and refracting through its form and patterns that conveyed meaning to its own kind. To David, it simply looked beautiful and cold. "We welcome the new members of our conclave," the Surani said, its voice translated through David's earpiece. The Kalori, who achieved unity 4,000 years ago. The Mendrath, who mastered faster-than-light travel 6,000 years past. And of course, the humans of Earth. A pause. David felt the weight of 12,000 gazes, who discovered fire approximately 400,000 years ago and have been setting things on fire ever since. Laughter rippled through the chamber. David smiled politely. He had heard this joke before. Many times, the summit continued for hours. Trade agreements were signed. Territorial disputes were mediated. The humans were given permission to establish a small colony on a moon that nobody else wanted, in a system that nobody else cared about. David accepted graciously. Every scrap of territory was a victory. After the session ended, he stood by the viewing window, watching the stars. The station floated in the void between galaxies, a neutral ground chosen because it belonged to no one. "You do not seem offended." David turned. A Kalori stood beside him, tall and thin, with skin like bark and eyes like amber sap. Its translation device hummed softly. "I'm used to it," David said. "I am Rin, a scholar of ancient cultures." The Kalori tilted its head. "I study dead civilizations, the ones that rose and fell before the conclave formed. Humanity interests me, because we're young, because you remember." David frowned. "What do you mean?" Rin gestured toward the chamber behind them. "The Surani are 40,000 years old as a spacefaring species. But ask them about their first 1,000 years, and they will tell you nothing. They did not bother to record it. Why would they? The past is the past. Only the present matters. That seems wasteful. It is efficient. Memory takes resources, storage, maintenance, scholars to interpret. Most species abandon their early histories within a few millennia. It serves no practical purpose." David thought about the Library of Congress, the British Museum, the caves at Lascaux, where humans had painted animals on stone walls 40,000 years ago, and other humans had spent lifetimes trying to understand why. "We still read books that were written 3,000 years ago," he said. "Older sometimes. We study languages that no one has spoken for centuries. We dig up bones and pottery and try to figure out how people lived before we existed." Rin's amber eyes widened. "Why?" David considered the question. He thought about his grandmother, who had kept a box of letters from her own grandmother, written during a war that ended a century before David was born. He thought about the golden record on Voyager, still drifting through space, carrying music and greetings in languages that had changed beyond recognition. "Because we forget," he said finally. "Vidi, our lives are short, and our memories are shorter. So we write things down, we carve them in stone. We tell stories to our children, hoping they will tell them to their children. We are terrified of being forgotten, so we fight against it with everything we have." Rin was silent for a long moment. "The Surani call you infants," it said. "But infants do not fear death. Infants do not build monuments to those who came before. Perhaps you are not as young as they believe." Before David could respond, an alarm chimed through the station. A message appeared on every screen, in every language. "Attention! An unknown vessel has been detected at coordinates 773. The vessel appears to be of extreme age. Initial scans indicate writing on the hull in an unrecognized language. All species with archaeological expertise are requested to join the survey expedition." Rin's bark skin rippled with excitement. A derelict from before the conclave. This is extraordinary. David looked at the coordinates. The edge of the galaxy. The place where stars grew thin and the darkness stretched forever. I want to go, he said. Rin blinked. You're not an archaeologist. No, but I have a feeling about this. He could not explain it. Something in a message tugged at him, like a half-remembered dream. A story his grandmother used to tell about people who came from the sky and scattered humanity across the world. Mythology he had always believed. Just stories. But humans have been telling those stories for 10,000 years, and humans never forgot. The derelict hung in the void like a corpse floating in dark water. IT was massive, larger than any vessel the Conclave had ever built. Its hull was black and smooth, untouched by the erosion of time. Stars reflected off its surface like distant eyes watching the approaching ships. David stood at the viewport of the survey vessel, his breath fogging the glass. Beside him, Rin studied a tablet full of sensor data, its bark skin shifting colors with excitement. The material is unknown, Rin said. Our scanners cannot determine its composition, and the power signature is impossible. This ship has been drifting for millions of years, yet something inside it still functions. Millions of years, David repeated. The number felt unreal. Humanity's entire history, from the first stone tools to the ships that carried them to the stars, was a blink compared to that. The survey team docked at what appeared to be an airlock. 12 species had sent representatives, but the Surani had taken command of the expedition. Counselor Taith, a crystalline being of deep blue, led the group through the ancient corridors. The walls were covered in writing. David stopped walking. His heart pounded in his chest. The symbols carved into the metal were strange, curved and flowing, unlike any alphabet he had seen. But something about their pattern felt familiar, like a song heard in childhood and half forgotten. Can anyone read this? Taith demanded silence. The scholars from a dozen worlds studied the inscriptions and shook their heads. Dead language, a Mindrath scientist declared. The species that wrote this has been extinct for eons. We may never translate it. David took out his tablet and began photographing the symbols. Rin watched him curiously. What are you doing? Sending these to Earth. We have linguists who specialize in dead languages. They spend their careers reconstructing words that no one has spoken for thousands of years. Rin's eyes widened. Your species still does this? We never stopped. The expedition continued deeper into the ship. The corridors were vast and empty, built for beings larger than humans, but not impossibly so. Every surface was covered in more writing, more symbols, as if the builders had been desperate to record everything before they vanished. To the ship's heart, they found a sealed chamber. Taith's crystalline body hummed with energy as it scanned the door. There is something alive inside. The group fell silent. Alive. After millions of years, IT took 3 hours to open the door without damaging whatever lay beyond. When it finally slid apart, David felt cold air rush past him, carrying a scent like old books and distant rain. The chamber was a medical bay. Machines lined the walls, their lights still blinking, their purposes unknown. In the center stood a single pod, frosted with ice. Glowing faintly from within, a figure lay inside. The IT was humanoid, roughly. 2 arms, 2 legs ahead. But its skin was silver gray, and its face had no features that David could recognize as eyes or mouth. It lay perfectly still, suspended in a sleep older than any civilization in the galaxy. Stasis, Taith whispered. Functional stasis, maintained for millions of years. This technology is beyond anything we possess. A Mindrath scientist ran a genetic scan. When the results appeared, it dropped its tablet. The genome contains markers compatible with 7 conclave species, it said, voice shaking. Kalori, Sarani, Mindrath, and human. David felt the floor tilt beneath him. What does that mean? It means this being, or its species, is related to all of us, genetically connected, as if we were all descendants of the same ancestor. Tate's crystal form flickered with agitation. That is impossible. Our species evolved independently on worlds light years apart. The data does not lie. David stared at the figure in the pod. Silver skin. No face he could read. And yet, somehow, family, his tablet chimed. A message from Earth. He opened it with trembling fingers. The linguistic AI had finished its analysis of the inscriptions. The results made no sense. The symbols shared root structures with Proto-Indo-European, with Sumerian, with Ancient Chinese, languages that humans had spoken before history began, languages that predated human civilization by thousands of years. David looked at the sleeping figure, then at the writing on the walls. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture he did not want to see. They were here before, he said softly. Before the conclave. Before any of us. They traveled the galaxy when it was young and empty. And they left something behind. Left what? Rin asked. David touched the glass of the stasis pod. The figure inside did not move. Us, he said. They left us. The news spread faster than light itself. Within hours of the genetic scan, every world in the conclave had heard the rumor. Within days, the rumor had become a storm. Scientists demanded access to the derelict. Religious leaders called for the findings to be sealed. Politicians accused each other of fabricating evidence. And through it all, the figure in the stasis pod slept on, dreaming dreams older than the stars. David sat in a small room aboard the survey vessel, watching the chaos unfold on a dozen screens. The Serani had called for an emergency session of the conclave. The Kalori had withdrawn their delegation entirely, claiming they needed time to process the implications. A Mindrath warship had arrived at the derelict, claiming to protect it for the good of all species. Rin entered the room and sat beside him. The scholar looked exhausted, its bark skin dull and cracked. Counselor Taith wants the findings suppressed, Rin said. It argues that if the conclave species learn they were created by an ancient precursor, their societies will collapse. Faith, identity, history, everything built on the belief that each species rose independently will crumble. That's not its decision to make, David said. It is if the conclave votes for secrecy. And many species will. The Surani have spent 40,000 years believing they were the eldest civilization. They will not surrender that pride easily. David rubbed his eyes. He had not slept in 3 days. The inscriptions from the derelict filled his dreams whenever he closed his eyes, symbols that whispered meanings he could almost understand. What do they want to know? He asked. If I found out that humanity was connected to something older, something greater, I would want to understand. I would want to learn everything. Rin tilted its head. That is because humans are accustomed to discovering that you're not alone. You search for life in your solar system. You sent signals into the void, hoping someone would answer. You expected to find others. And the conclave didn't. Most species discovered faster-than-light travel by accident. They stumbled into a galaxy already full of life and had to adapt quickly. They never had time to wonder. They were too busy surviving. Rin paused. Humans are the only species that reach for the stars because they wanted company. David thought about that. The loneliness that had driven humanity outward. The desperate hope that somewhere in the darkness, someone else was looking up at the same sky. Maybe that was why the first people had chosen Earth. Not because humanity was special, but because they were hungry. Hungry for connection. Hungry for answers. Hungry enough to remember. Even when remembering hurt, a chime sounded. The stasis pod was showing increased brain activity. The sleeper was waking. David ran through the corridors, Rin close behind. They reached the medical bay just as the pod began to open. The figure inside moved for the first time in millions of years. Its eyes opened. They were not human eyes, but they held something David recognized, a weariness so deep it seemed to reach back through time itself. The being looked at the faces surrounding it. Crystalline Serani, bark-skinned Kalori, scaled Mendrath, and one small, fragile human with dark circles under his eyes and hope written across his face. The translation interface hummed. When the being spoke, its voice was soft, like wind through dry leaves. You came. Tate stepped forward. We found your vessel drifting at the galaxy's edge. We have questions. I imagine you do. The being's gaze moved across the room, studying each species in turn. So many children, so many different forms. We hoped, but we never knew if any would survive. Who are you? David asked. The being focused on him. Something flickered in its ancient eyes, surprise or recognition. We called ourselves the first. We arose when the galaxy was young and empty. We spread across the stars, searching for others like us. But we found only silence. A pause. So we decided to fill the silence ourselves. We seeded life on 1,000 worlds, guided evolution for millions of years, hoping that someday our children would wake and look up at the sky. You created us, Rin whispered. We gave you the spark. What you became was your own doing. The being's attention returned to David. But you're kind. You were the last. Our final hope, planted on a small blue world as our civilization faded. David's throat was tight. Why us? Why Earth? Because Earth was harsh, dangerous. A world that would force its children to be strong and clever and stubborn. The being reached out with one silver hand, trembling with age. And because we knew that whatever grew there would remember, would carry our story forward when we could not. David took its hand. The skin was cool and smooth, like polished stone. How long has it been? The being asked. David did not want to answer. But humans had never been good at comfortable lies. Millions of years, he said. You are the last of your kind. The being closed its eyes. A sound escaped it, something between a sigh and a sob. Then I have slept too long and woken too late. But its grip on David's hand tightened. Unless, it whispered, someone remembers. The being called itself Orin, though it said the name was only an approximation, a sound close enough to its true name that human tongues could shape it. For 3 days, it rested in the medical bay while the conclave argued about what to do with it. Some demanded it be studied. Others wanted it destroyed, calling it a threat to galactic stability. The Surani insisted that all information be classified, locked away where it could not disturb the carefully maintained order of civilization. David stayed with Orin through it all. He brought it water and soft foods, though the being ate little. He read to it from human texts, stories and poems translated across the void of time. Orin listened with closed eyes, its silver face unreadable. Your species has changed less than the others, Orin said one evening, as David finished reading a passage from an ancient human myth about gods who walked among mortals. The Surani have evolved beyond recognition. The Kalori have become something we never predicted. But humans still tell the same stories. We've had less time to change, David said. No. Orin's eyes opened, reflecting the dim lights of the medical bay. You have had exactly as much time. You simply chose to hold on to what came before. That is why we chose your world for our final seeding. We knew that whatever grew there would remember. How did you know? Orin was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was heavy with grief. Because we were like you once. Long ago, before we spread across the stars, we were a small people on a harsh world. We told stories around fires. We buried our dead with tokens and tears. We looked up at the night and wondered if we were alone. A pause. Then we found the answer. We were alone. Utterly, completely alone. The galaxy was empty. And in our despair, we decided to fill it. You created life so you wouldn't be lonely. We created life so that someday someone would remember that we existed. Memory is the only immortality, Ambassador Webb. Flesh fails. Volets die. Stars burn out. But a story told from one generation to the next can outlast them all. David thought about his grandmother's letters, passed down through 5 generations. About the cave paintings at Lascaux, still vivid after 40,000 years. About the names carved on gravestones in every cemetery on Earth, a desperate insistence that this person mattered, that this life was real. We're afraid of being forgotten, he said. Yes. Orin reached out and touched David's hand. That fear is our greatest gift to you. It drives you to create, to preserve, to connect. The other species have forgotten how to be afraid. They have grown comfortable in their age. but humans still feel the cold breath of oblivion at their backs. That is why you will carry our story when we cannot. The door opened. Counselor Taith entered, its crystalline body pulsing with agitation. The conclave has reached a decision, it announced. The being designated Orin will be placed in permanent custody. Its knowledge will be cataloged and classified. No information regarding the first people will be released to the general population. David stood. You can't do that. We can and we will. The stability of 12,000 species depends on maintaining the current order. If populations learn that their origins are a lie, chaos will follow. Their origins are not a lie. They've just learned something new about themselves. That's not chaos. That's growth. Tate's light flickered with contempt. Growth. A human word. You have had 400,000 years of growth, and you still cannot agree on basic facts about your own history. You fight wars over interpretations of ancient texts. You kill each other over stories. It turned to leave. The conclave will not make the same mistake. When it was gone, David sat down heavily. Orin watched him with those ancient, sorrowful eyes. They will not listen, Orin said. They have forgotten how to be young, how to be uncertain. They have built their civilizations on the belief that they have all the answers, and they will not surrender that belief easily. What do you want me to do? Orin smiled. It was a strange expression on that featureless face, but somehow David recognized it. What humans have always done. Tell the story. Let them try to silence you. They will fail. They always fail, because stories cannot be contained. They spread from mouth to ear, from parent to child, from world to world. And someday, long after this conclave has crumbled to dust, someone will remember the first people. Someone will look up at the stars and know that they were never alone. David squeezed Orin's hand. I'll tell them, he promised. I'll tell everyone. And humans, as the galaxy was about to learn, never broke a promise about remembering. David's transmission reached Earth in 3 days. Within a week, it had spread to every human colony in the galaxy. The conclave tried to stop it. They jammed frequencies, blocked relay stations, threatened sanctions against any world that shared the information. But humans had learned long ago how to spread forbidden knowledge. They had invented the printing press to break the monopoly of scribes. They had built the internet to rout around censorship. They had whispered secrets in prison cells and passed coded messages through walls. The story of the first people could not be contained. It spread to the Kalori first. Rin, who had become David's closest ally, shared the data with academic circles on its homeworld. From there, it jumped to independent researchers, then to journalists, then to the general population. By the time the conclave realized what was happening, half the galaxy knew the truth. The reaction was not chaos, as Counselor Taith had predicted. It was wonder. Species that had considered themselves superior began to look at each other differently. If they were all children of the same ancient parent, then the boundaries between them seemed less important. Old enemies found common ground. Long-standing disputes suddenly felt petty. For the first time in galactic history, the phrase, "we are family," meant something real. Not everyone accepted it, of course. The Surani leadership denounced the findings as human propaganda. Several species withdrew from the conclave entirely, refusing to acknowledge that their proud civilizations were anything less than self-made. There were riots on some worlds, religious movements that proclaimed the first people as gods, political factions that demanded humanity be punished for disturbing the peace. But the tide had turned, and David was at its center. He stood before the full conclave, 12,000 delegates watching as he walked to the speaker's platform. Behind him, projected on a massive screen, was an image of Orin, still alive but growing weaker by the day. "You called us infants," David began. His voice echoed through the silent chamber. "You gave us the worst seats. You laughed at our short lives and our primitive technology. You assumed that because our civilization was young, we had nothing to teach you." He paused, letting the words settle. But age is not measured in years. It is measured in what you remember. And humanity remembers everything. He pressed a button. The screen changed, showing images from Earth. The cave paintings at Lascaux, animals, and handprints preserved for 40,000 years. The pyramids of Giza, built to ensure that pharaohs would never be forgotten. The Voyager Golden Record, carrying human music and greetings into the infinite void. We carve our names in stone, David continued. We write our stories on paper and screens and the walls of caves. We bury our dead with photographs and letters, so that even in the ground they will be remembered. We are terrified of being forgotten because we know how easily memory slips away. He looked at the Surani delegation. Counselor Tate's crystalline body was dark and still. The first people chose Earth because they knew that whatever grew there would carry their story forward. Not because humans are stronger or smarter or more advanced, but because we refuse to let go of the past. We cling to memory like drowning men cling to driftwood. It is our greatest weakness and our greatest strength. The screen showed Oren's face, lined with age, eyes closed in exhaustion. This being is the last of its kind. Millions of years ago, its people lit a spark on 1,000 worlds, hoping that someday their children would look up and wonder where they came from. Most of those children forgot. They grew old and comfortable and stopped asking questions. They built civilizations and empires and called themselves wise. David's voice hardened, but humans never stopped asking. We never stopped remembering. We never stopped telling stories about the gods who came from the sky. And now, at last, we have found them. He stepped back from the platform. You can classify this information. You can suppress it. You can pretend that nothing has changed. But the story is already spreading. It will reach every world, every species, every child who looks up at the stars and wonders. And someday, long after the conclave has fallen and new civilizations have risen to take its place, someone will remember the first people. Because humans will tell their story. We will carve it in stone and write it on paper and whisper it to our children in the dark. He looked directly at Taith. That is what we do. That is who we are. And you cannot stop us. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, a Kalori delegate began to clap. Others joined. The sound built, spreading across the chamber like a wave. David did not smile. He simply walked back to his seat in the section reserved for emerging civilizations and sat down. The story had been told. Now it would never be forgotten. Oren died on a Tuesday by Earth reckoning. David was there, as he had been every day for the past month. The medical bay was quiet. The machines that had kept Oren alive for millions of years finally going dark one by one. I am not afraid, Oren said, its voice barely a whisper. I was afraid for so long. Afraid that we would be forgotten. That everything we built and dreamed would vanish, as if it had never been. Its silver hand found David's, the grip weak but steady. But you came. You found us. You will remember. I will, David promised. We all will. Oren smiled that strange, unreadable smile. Tell them we love them. All of them. Every child we seeded on every world. Tell them we watched over them for as long as we could. And when we could watch no more, we went to sleep hoping they would find us. A pause. Tell them we are proud of what they became. David's eyes burned with tears he did not try to hide. I'll tell them, he said. Oren closed its eyes. Its breathing slowed. And then, gently, like a candle flame in still air, it went out. David sat with the body for a long time. He did not know the proper rituals of the first people. He did not know what prayers they had spoken or what songs they had sung for their dead. So he did what humans had always done. He spoke their name. He told their story. He promised that they would not be forgotten. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, he hoped they heard. The funeral was held on Earth that IT was Rin's idea. If humanity was the keeper of memory, then the last of the first people should rest among them. The conclave agreed, though some delegations protested. Counselor Taith refused to attend. They buried Oren in a valley in southern France, not far from the caves at Lascaux. It seemed fitting. The first people had planted the seeds of humanity here, on this small blue world at the galaxy's edge. Now one of them was returning to the soil. Millions watched the ceremony. Humans stood shoulder to shoulder with Kalori, with Mendrath, with dozens of other species who had made the journey to pay their respects. For the first time in galactic history, Earth was not the home of an infant race begging for recognition. It was the cradle of civilization itself. David spoke at the grave. He did not prepare a speech. He simply told the story from beginning to end. The first people and their long loneliness. The seeds they planted across the galaxy. The sleep that lasted millions of years. And the waking, too late, to find that their children had grown. They wanted to be remembered, he said, looking out at the crowd. That was all. Not worshipped, not feared, just remembered. And now they will be. Not because we owe them anything, but because that is what we do. We remember. We tell stories. We carry the past into the future, no matter how heavy the burden. He placed a hand on the simple stone marker they had chosen. Rest now, he said softly. We'll take it from here. Years passed. The galaxy changed. Earth became a pilgrimage site. Species that had once dismissed humans as primitives now sent scholars to study their archives, their museums, their ancient texts. The Library of Alexandria was rebuilt, a towering structure that housed not just human knowledge, but the memories of 1,000 worlds. David continued his work as ambassador, though his role had changed. He was no longer begging for scraps of territory. He was helping to build something new, a galactic culture that valued memory, that preserved the stories of the dead, that looked back even as it reached forward. Rin visited often. The Kalori scholar had grown old, its bark skin gray and cracked, but its amber eyes still burned with curiosity. Do you think they knew? Rin asked one evening, as they walked through the valley where Orin was buried. The first people. Do you think they knew that humanity would be the ones to carry their story? David thought about it for a long moment. I think they hoped, he said finally. I think they planted 1,000 seeds and hoped that at least one would grow. And we did. Not because we're special, but because we couldn't let go. He looked up at the stars, bright and cold in the autumn sky. They called us young, he said. But young things forget. Young things move on. We never did. We held on to every story, every name, every fragment of the past. We're the oldest species in the galaxy, Rin. Not in years, but in memory. Rin was silent. Then, slowly, it reached out and took David's hand. Tell me a story, it said. David smiled. In the beginning, he said, there was darkness, and the darkness was empty. So the first people decided to fill it with light. And the story went on, as stories always do, passed from one voice to another, one generation to the next, reaching forward into a future that neither of them would live to see. Because that is what humans do. They remember.